Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our Breaking Down Barriers Women in Supply Chain Leadership session today. We've got a very esteemed panel, and we hope that you, as we are going through this session, you also kind of pick up on things that you may want to discuss or ask questions on. And there's also an option to do some feedback on the app as well, so we would appreciate that. And I'm gonna hand over to Katrina to start us off.
Pamela Steele Associates. Although I won't be able to join you at the CEPIX conference this year, I am thrilled to be here virtually to kickstart this panel discussion on women in supply chain leadership. Today, we will delve into the experiences and perspectives of remarkable women who are blazing a trail across Africa's supply chain leadership roles. We'll uncover the challenges they face and, most importantly, explore practical steps that can accelerate change. But before we hear from our esteemed panelists, we want to share some insightful data from all of you. It is evident that tackling gender inequality requires concerted actions and gender-intentional policies throughout a woman's career life cycle. These actions involve women taking charge of their own paths, but they also require interventions from everyone, particularly senior leaders and policymakers. Now let's talk about the data. Across Africa, there is a scarcity of information on women in leadership and even fewer insights specific to women in supply chain leadership. To bridge this gap, we tapped into the expansive CEPIX network, the collective wisdom of all of you, to generate some valuable insights for our panel discussion today. So without further ado, I invite you to join in listening to the panel in the enlightening discussion on women in supply chain leadership. Let's learn from each other, challenge the status quo, and work together to create a future where women's voices and contributions are fully recognized and celebrated. So let's take a few moments to explore what you shared and compare it to insights from around the world. Thank you for being a part of this important conversation. Enjoy the panel discussion, and let's make a difference together. Over to you, panel chair.
Love her passion.
Yeah. For those of you who are not familiar with Pam, on the chair outside the room, there is some more information on a program that she's running called Girls on the Move, which is an internship program where she gives girls an opportunity to go and work in supply chain roles, and they're given work experience as well as mentorship. So it's a fantastic example of practical ways we can tackle gender inequality. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to go through some of the insights from the survey. We've decided to extend the time that you can respond to this survey. So if you have got the WOVA app, you should be able to go into the front page and click on the survey, and we're going to keep it open for another week, but I'm going to take you through some of the insights that we've got so far. And then the intention is that we'll try and run this same survey every year and compare results and look where we are. I am going to run through this very quickly so you get the time from these amazing women, but if you've got any questions or you want to have access to the data, we'll share it straight after. Okay, so thank you. We did get some male respondents, and it's great to see we have a really good balance in the room, but the majority of people who responded were female. We had respondents from all over the world, a few African countries, but the majority were South Africa. And we had respondents from all different industries. And it's interesting to see that, as well as supply chain, optimization, logistics, and transport, there's a big representation from health, medical, and global health, which represents the focus we've had this year to try and include some global health supply chain sessions. 77% of you are in a supply chain role now. We've got good coverage from all over the organisation levels, so senior, C-suite, students, first-time jobs, and a good balance across span of accountability, so individuals, managers, and managers who manage managers. So 82% of you responded to say that you're very happy in your current job, which is great to hear. But 62% of you agreed or strongly agreed that they feel they have career advancement opportunities. And then the gender of the most senior leader within your organization. So 69% male, 31% female. If you compare that to the Future 500 CEO list from the US, just 10.4% of senior CEOs are women. So in terms of our audience, we're doing better than the US average. And I think to go back to the point that Pam made, in doing this information search and survey, we've realized there's very little data on women in supply chain leadership in Africa. So this gives us some more information, and what do we want to do with that information? We want to use it to drive actions. We want to look at practical solutions. I won't go through all of this in detail, but as well as the most senior person in the organization, we looked who are the people that report in, so the senior leadership team. So just one of the organizations had 100% of the direct reports being female, and the majority of organizations were somewhere between 25 and 50% representation of women. There were 3 organizations who had no women at all in their leadership team, and you can see the breakdown there. So 59% of you reported that you believe career advancement opportunities are equal across genders, but 22% of you had a strong disagree or a disagreement. And 52% of you suspected that salaries were higher for men. Nobody suspected that salaries on average were higher for women. And then we asked a question about some of the policies and incentives different organizations offered. A broad range of incentives came back, the biggest one being flexible working, also offering coaching and mentorship systems. You can see there some of the examples. And then we asked a few open-ended questions, and some of these responses were really interesting. And we don't have time to go through them in detail today, but what were the most significant career barriers in your opinion? And you'll see there that, interestingly, some of the things that came up a lot were people's perception of a lack of knowledge or a lack of experience, but also a lack of self-confidence. And you see a quote there at the bottom from the Harvard Business Review, which says that men will on average apply for a job when they meet 60% of the qualifications, while women will tend to only apply if they meet 100% of the qualifications. So there's some things there to think about for you personally. What can you do differently? And if you're a recruiting manager, you need to have awareness of this fact and think about how you look for the people you want to be recruiting for your roles. And then what actions have you personally taken to advance your career? So what you told us, the majority here was people who either go into formal education, so degrees, masters, but also do short courses or self-learning or on-the-job learning through their organization. Networking and coaching came up very highly as well. And again, a little quote, you'll see, investing in your growth and self-development isn't selfish. It's self-care, and it's also your responsibility. So you're going to hear some information from these women today, and at the end, we encourage you to think about what you can personally do differently to advocate for yourself. And then leaders, both male and female, what can you do differently to advocate for women within your organizations, within your family, and think about what action or I will statement you want to leave the room with. And if you're happy to share them with us, we'd love for you to put them in the app so we can look at some of the things people commit to doing. And the last one was a question about, have you ever experienced discrimination in the workplace? And we also expanded this to find out what actions have been taken. And this is something we'll share in the report afterwards. But a massive 56% of you said you'd either witnessed or experienced discrimination in the workplace, which is a really high number. Okay, and with that, before I hand over to the wonderful Priti, we mentioned there a few times that there is very little research on women in supply chain leadership in Africa, so if anybody is feeling like they want to put some money towards funding this research, please come speak to me afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. So, now we are going to start on. Katrina just took my phone and this. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the more interesting bit. That's the survey was very interesting because it gave us so many insights around the status of women in supply chain leadership. And also, I think this session is more of also like an advocacy session to also advocate to include women in leadership and decision-making positions in supply chain. And now I'm going to go to our panelists and kind of go through some questions that we thought would be very interesting to expand the conversation a little bit from the survey. So my first question is going to MJ. And I'm also sorry because we're not going to be introducing the panel, so we will keep their lovely headshots on the screen whilst we take the questions, because we really want to also have a discussion with our audience. So, MJ, what is your leadership style? And do you think your leadership style is different from your male counterparts?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm MJ. You can see from the picture, right? It's a great question. So I asked Priti to show this diagram that I picked up on LinkedIn recently. And when I talk about leadership style, personally, I don't talk about feminine and masculine. I think every person is different. So my leadership style, I'm more of a collaborative type of leader. I've also led people virtually already before COVID. It was quite normal. I had teams in different countries. And it was really about the listening. It's about being the empathy. It's more of sort of the future leader style, where you listen to your team, you engage with your team, and you try to buy them into what you believe is the right thing to do. And sometimes you can learn something from your team. So it's sort of that servant leadership that is important. What was interesting, though, is I moved on from my role, and I met up with my team later. And they had a guy, and I'm not differentiating between male or female at this moment, but they happened to get a guy who took over my job. And I said to them, so how's it going? How's it going with the teamwork? And they said, you know, it's the one thing we miss. And they said, what? He says, he's really nice and collaborative, but he doesn't make any decisions. So I said, what do you mean he doesn't make any decisions? No, he lets us decide, but he's the boss, he should decide. So I think that's a very important thing about leadership, is that you can be collaborative, you have to include your team, you have to listen to the voice of your team. There's a good level of servant leadership that you have, but a decision needs to be made. And even if it's a decision that they don't like, you make them part of the story. And that's a skill, that's something that you learn. I can't say I was the same leader 20 years ago. It's very difficult to be a leader. So I'm sure some of you say, the masculine is power and the female is empathy. Those are two good things. So if we look at how we complement each other as male and female, I have to say, all of my career, 35 years of my career, I've had male bosses, and I've had one female boss, which was a disaster, and all my bosses were male. And I remember how frustrated I was when I said to him, I want to be a director. Why am I not being a director? I'm delivering, I'm doing everything, I'm meeting all my KPIs. Why am I not becoming a director? And some of us, I think, ladies, don't even ask that question. They just keep on bringing the results, and they don't ask the question. So he looked at me and says, MJ, he was Italian, he says, MJ, be patient. I'm like, no, I have no patience. And then he sent me on a women's leadership course where they taught us actually to start looking at ourselves. So we often look outside, and this is male or female, we look outside and we say, I'm doing everything I need to do, why isn't it happening? But you need to look at yourself. We actually spent a week looking at ourselves saying, what can we do differently about our leadership style? And are we reading our audience? Because you cannot be a leader the same with everybody. Everybody is different. So I did that course for a year. I got a coach. I was mentored. I was told, stop being operational and in a rush, slow down and smell the flowers. And one day he walked up to my desk and said, MJ, you're a D1. And I went, excuse me? You're a D1. I made you a director. Just like that, out of the blue, without any discussion. So really, you know, when I talk about the male-female, I think that diagram gives you a nice insight into what that can look like. Leadership style, collaborative, empathy, servant leadership, but know where the boundaries are so that business can continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MJ. And I think like one of the things that I really liked from your point now was everyone must also realize that we've got some cognitive biases that we might be applying in our view of female leaders that are not necessarily true as well. But there is power in recognizing the more, you know, the empathic and considerate and collaborative approach to leadership, as well as the competitive and rationality. But we should not be ascribing those things to gender, because it's leadership styles. And I think this is a perfect way to segue into my next question, which is going to Kirsten. What factors influence a woman's ability to lead others? And is this different for supply chain roles, which have traditionally been more male-dominated?
So I think when I saw the question, that roles need to be differently from a male or a female. My point of view. Hear her?
Maybe.
Okay, so shall I start again?
Yes.
So when I thought about the question, I was thinking that I don't know if leadership factors and things that drive leadership really need to be different between men and women. And I think one certain aspect, and I'll go into it now, I think women might have a little bit of an advantage over their male counterparts. So I think let me talk about the really 5 key drivers that I think are very important for anybody in leadership to have. And the first one is competency, right? And competency you get throughout your entire career, not only when you start, but also when you've been in different roles for 30 years. How do you develop these competencies? You get them through education, so short courses, long courses, degrees. You get them through exposure. And between the exposure and the education, you end up getting experience, right? So this all builds your competency within your different roles. And I think that everybody has to strive to have these competencies. I think one of the big things that everybody needs to have is some kind of a development plan. And development plan doesn't necessarily mean career advancement, so climbing the corporate ladder, but it can be just really making you the very best in the role that you've got. And in my scenario, which is in sales, in a pharmaceutical environment, we have got a lot of sales representatives that want to stay sales representatives. And for them, they need to have a development plan. They need to know that they can develop into the best person that they can be. So it's not only about climbing the ladder, but it's just about developing. But I think the key here for development is that you own it. So I've often heard comments about the fact that my manager is not helping me with my development plan. So your manager, or anybody for that matter, can help you with your development plan, but you, the owner, you need to start putting those fundamentals together and decide what it is that you want to do or where you need to go. The next driver, I think, is definitely confidence, and it was mentioned in the feedback, that you're only going to gather self-confidence the more you put yourself out there. You need to step out of your comfort zone, expose yourself to different situations that you weren't in before. It's the only way that you get confidence. And the other thing that I think is a really good culture to drive is feedback. And at Janssen, we are busy embarking on that at the moment, where we are trying to get people to give feedback all the time. And I think the more you get feedback from everybody, the more you're going to grow, and you're going to learn about yourself, and you're going to learn about what you're strong at and where your gaps are. The other thing is just communication. And again, the more you put yourself out there, the more you ask for feedback, the more you find out about whether you're actually communicating well or whether you're not communicating well. The other thing is resilience, right? And I think COVID really helped us with all building a lot of resilience. But again, I think as a leader, you need to develop that skill, because you can't often really show people what you really think at that time. So I think faking it and developing resilience is quite important. And I've got a very, very descriptive face, so I've had to learn to really keep my game face on and not to flare my nostrils in meetings like I sometimes do because it's a dead giveaway. And the other thing is bias, and I think this is what I wanted to allude to in supply chain. So in a multinational company, we don't actually have manufacturing facilities. A lot of ours is demand and supply. We don't really have the make side of supply. And in my career, I've never actually had any males working with me from a supply chain point of view. But I think the bias comes in from a make point of view, where men have always predominantly moved towards that engineering side. And I think there is a bias. And so how do we overcome that bias if we're wanting to go that way? Well, we learn, right? We expose ourselves, we improve our competencies. And I'd like to give two examples. One is one of my GPH supply chain managers told me about a lady who was in her 50s and had just completed her BCom in supply chain management. And another one is one of my sales representatives that wanted to go into the medical side of marketing. And I kept saying to her, you need to have a BSc. And her response to me was, at 45, am I going to go and do a BSc? I said, yes. What's holding you back? So you can always develop those competencies. And I think the more we do that, the more we'll see those kind of biases fall away. And the sixth point that I think is really a key driver, and I do think here that women have maybe got this a little bit better, because when it comes to collaboration, I mean, we are part of the sisterhood, right? We're mothers, we're sisters, we're daughters. We just do the collaboration thing a little bit better, but I think collaboration is key. And I think when you combine all these drivers and all these factors, we can overcome whatever bias there is, whether, I mean, it's pilots always used to be men, right? Engineers always used to be men. I think we can overcome it, and we can definitely all, both male and female, really work together at being better leaders than what we are at the moment.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. And I think, you know, she also touched in some of the findings that we had projected here from the survey, where, you know, most people do not really have the confidence, felt like they didn't have the confidence to take on leadership roles because they did not think they had the skills or they had the capabilities. But then it's also a call to action to say, have a personal development plan and have a plan to advance your career, and also even you know, tapping into your community, tapping into your network for some of that mentorship and coaching as well. And my next question goes to Azuka. As a woman in leadership, supply chain leadership, Azuka, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced in moving into supply chain leadership, and what was the most significant barrier that you've experienced to date?
Okay, thank you very much. I've just been comfortable learning, and okay. Well, when I was hired from my position to come and lead the ARC work in Nigeria, one of the reasons that was given to me was my boss said to me, well, they told me that if I hire you, I would go and sleep, because you're very, if you're given a job to do, you do it. So basically, you're coming on board so that I go and sleep. So he was very comfortable with my coming on board. Then I was given a task to lead a supply chain transformation work in Nigeria that required making significant changes in the system. And it required major disruptions in how we operate, particularly within the typical implementing structure in the public health sector. The moment I started that project, leading that with ministers and the leaderships in the pharma companies, it now turned out that, well, I would say there was this, I call it a diversity cloud. I don't want to say it's there, up there, that people go to that cloud when they want to change focus, when they want to move from the issue. The transformation work was backed by data. It was backed by fact. It was backed by the need that we need to be less donor dependent. We needed to make changes within government where they would take ownership. But that kind of cost a lot of, you know, many or I would say companies, organizations, it was like they saw it as a threat in the system, because that's what moving the needle would do, and I was quite subtle with it. But then I realized there was this cloud up there. In some instances, it was a gender cloud. When many, and again, in Africa, in Nigeria, most of the supply chain work in terms of leadership were being done by men. Majority. I think the only women in the space that were leading work in those days were Pamela Steele, who wasn't even Nigerian, Deborah Daw, who was not Nigerian. So I was one of the few Nigerian women making a case for change. Whenever the male counterparts in that level didn't want to address the issue, they moved to the gender cloud. They said, this woman, she's aggressive, she's this. When some of the, it was distracting, but one of the things that was quite significant is that many people get distracted easily by the cloud. And they like to deviate from the issue. The issue was, do we need to be less donor dependent? Yes. The issue was the solution backed by facts and figures of what would work in Nigeria? Yes. But people made it about this woman. All of a sudden, I didn't know I was a woman. Everything was about this woman. She's very, and people would make certain faces. She's, But anyway, but that's the fact that it is there, but I call it cloud because you don't need to stay in the cloud. Mm-hmm. You need to stay focused on the real issues and remain focused. Sometimes the cloud is there, you can't ignore it. It will always be there. And it's sometimes also, I've experienced it the other way around. Recently, and also in my role, I was called to a Women in Leadership webinar. And it was only women, and they were having challenges accessing funds for venture capital. And what I heard from them, they were struggling, and it was about, again, they went to the gender cloud. It was men were assessing men. And I listened, and I said, okay, we can look at it from this angle, and maybe have you tried this approach? They almost ate me alive. It's a gender problem. Do not trivialize the issue. It's not that the gender problem or the diversity, sometimes it could be that you're bringing a local solution into an international solution space. But I have to constantly remind myself to not stay in the cloud and stay focused on the issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azuka. Very enlightening, and also kind of sheds light on some of the biases that we were talking about, and some leadership qualities in women being viewed as more aggressive and more combative, when in essence it is just trying to create space for yourself. And so my next question is on networking and the importance of it. This one is going to Lebo. So Lebo, what do you think is the value of women's leadership networks, and do you think there are enough of these in Africa?
Thank you so much for the question. Looking at everyone here, especially women in supply chain, in logistics, do you remember each and every person that you've spoken to? Who are they? Which companies are they coming from? Have you sent them an email since you've been here on Sunday? Have you done that? That's something to think about. Yeah. So when we come to sessions like this, and we speak of network, not just about leadership, it's around also how you want to get elevated. So I'm going to speak around two areas, and one around being yourself as an employee in an organization. As an employee in an organization, one thing that you must remember is that you have stakeholders, you have your subordinates, you have people that you are serving external into the industry. And your level of network and your worth is around all of those people. So how do you network? Part of it is really around when you providing a service in the organization as a logistics manager, as a buyer, as a supply chain manager. First part of it is as you serve, you need to know what your stakeholders require in terms of a service, because you build relationships with them. That's the first thing. You build relationships as well at different levels. And always remember that these networks, we're talking about internally, also goes not just at the top, also below. because those are the people that elevate you in the organization. So that's just internal. External is going back to the question that I was asking, how many of us have been liaising and building relationships? There's different levels of networking. I think us as women, we're quite good in forming relationships and clubs and being able to talk about a whole lot of other things. But we need to make sure that our level of networking is a level of networking that really elevates us. And then how do you do that? There's a lot of associations. For an example, myself, we established the African Women in Supply Chain Association as part of bringing a lot of women into a networking base where they can elevate, where they can share strategies. But part of it is really getting them to network outside South Africa and also into a global space. So there's really a business case that is working. I mean, it's good to have MJ here and Azuka, because these are some of the 2 women that we had identified as some of the top 100 women in supply chain in Africa. So they are able to connect into South Africa, into other African spaces, but the most part about it is that these are some of the 2 women as well that got into the global top 100 women. I'm talking global, not Africa, by the way. So when we speak of networking and elevating each other, for me, that's what it means. It's really around how do I use my networking base as an ambassador of supply chain to elevate other women? That's leadership for me. How do we ensure that those women that has been identified also elevate others and bring the networking base around it? For me, that's very critical and around networking. So I also want to bring another element around it, especially looking at transport and logistics as one of the industries that's highly male-dominated. We're building skills, we build capacities. Part of networking also comes with getting a coach, getting a sponsor, getting a mentor. Those are the people that really connect you. They connect the dot in the industry, they connect the dots in your organizations and also externally. That's one of the formulas that we need to adopt. We need to remember that when you are in corporate, I was saying to someone earlier that the one thing that we forget is that when we are in corporate, we are in business, there's a certain level of influence and affluence that we get because of virtue, by virtue of our roles. If I'm a leader, I'm a CEO, I'm a manager, because of the decisions that I make in the organization, what happens is that people get to respect me. But if I don't build, there's something called affluence. If I don't go outside of my shell, if I was a labor cecil when I was in corporate then, by the time I stepped out, people will forget who I am. How many CEOs do you know out there that had the clout? People knew them, people loved them, but they never developed the networks that were needed, which is the affluence. They did not give back. They did not become the mentors. They didn't become the coaches. They were not able to build the networks that sustain them. And what are those networks? Whichever industry that you are in, these associations, these conferences, let's make sure that they work for us. If you're a woman out there, be part of the women associations. When you are part of those women associations, also be willing to impact and plant the seed. For me, I believe that you build those networks by planting the seed out there. You don't have to be a label that sits and really talk about diversity and inclusivity all the time. However, the little bit of work that you can do, you can build the networks even with the youth. Some of the work that we are doing is with the youth. We have MOUs with the universities that focuses on transport and logistics. And the idea is to build the networks for the young ones. Think around it. If you are mentoring that young student that is in transport and logistics, are you aware that tomorrow they'll be the CEO of a company where you are an entrepreneur or you'll be looking for a job, you become a consultant, and they will remember who is that MJ, who is that Azuka, who is that label. So network, for me, you need to have a proper formula that works for you, internal to your organization and external in terms of making impact. And if you're not making impact, be part and parcel of the community of practitioners, of organizations as well, that makes a difference in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lebo, for highlighting networking as a very critical path in leadership as well. And my final question is going to go to Lisa. As a female leader in a widely dominated field, what have you done to ensure you are creating space for other women? And also, what industry opportunities do you think exist to create a sustainable pipeline of women growing into leadership?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay, good. So many facets to this one, right? And to your point, I did come up through the ranks in a very male-dominated field, not necessarily just field, but company and industry at the time, working for General Motors. Wind back the clock 35 years, and that's when I started with General Motors and worked my way up to an executive leadership role at the end of my career. But I was also pleased to see that the angle that I took here was represented in the survey, and that just shows that the issues that we deal with and that we're tackling and addressing are not by country. They exist across the globe, and so we can collaborate together and make a difference. But I think one of the most important responsibilities that we all have as women, as we move into executive and higher leadership positions especially, is to lift up other women. How many times do you see competition between women instead of the collaboration and the support and the helping develop each other and expanding networks and whatnot to help lift each other up? Too many times we see that women to women. It's not always men to women and other diversity issues. So a priority and focus for me as a female executive was absolutely to pay it forward, supporting individuals that came behind me, because I had a lot of support, I felt, from male colleagues throughout my career, and I didn't want to have my female colleagues have to rely on that to advance in their career. And one of the most effective ways that I found to do it was through mentorship and sponsorship. I was the recipient of great mentorship throughout my career. It really influenced me and made a significant impact on the career decisions that I made, the different jobs that I pursued. And one example in particular, I was very early in my career, I think probably 5-6 years into it, and I was in my own world, happy, just doing what I was doing, had no expectation to move anywhere at that point in time, and I was in a headquarters type of position. And I got a tap on the shoulder by someone who, these were almost every single one of my mentors as I went through my career were informal. So don't think that they have to be formal mentors through a formal program. Mentorship can be very informal and in many cases more effective that way. So I got a tap on my shoulder by someone that I absolutely respected and had many more years with the company than I did. And he said, "Lisa, it's time for you to go out into operations." I said, "Are you kidding me? I don't want to go out in that scary world. People that go out there never come back." And so, he said, "No, he saw in me what I didn't see in myself, right?" So I trusted him and I respected him and I took his advice. So I went from my industrial engineering, because when I came through the ranks, there was no supply chain degree. I got an industrial engineering degree. So I went from my industrial engineering role, where I was supporting the plants from afar, into one of our warehouses. I was on the after-sales side of the business in General Motors. And I absolutely loved it. Right? I went out into operations. It's very hands-on. I learned the business, and that is one of the things that I share with those who I mentor, is gain as many experiences as possible throughout your career. It will enable you to make better decisions and certainly be pivotal for you to be on the docket for more positions than you would if you stay in one silo. But it ended up really changing my career, because the roles that I took on later were very much dependent on my knowledge of operations. And so, being in supply chain and knowing the operations world was very key to me moving up further down the line. So I was a recipient, and I told my young self that I was going to pay it forward when I got into a position of being able to do that. So, and it's so interesting. I had notes here saying, asking you, do you know what the imposter syndrome is? Okay, so my example is the one that both of you referenced, right? So, the women have a tendency to not interview or go after a position unless they have almost a 100% of the requirements covered. My version of this says that men will apply even if they have 30%. I heard 60%, but I think it's more like 30%. They go for it. And we do this to ourselves, though. This is our heads, that little voice telling us that we can't do it, we're not qualified. I don't know why men don't have that little voice, but we need to kick that little voice off. So we do it to ourselves. It's our own self-doubt creeping in. And what I found is that other people really only start believing it if you let them, right? If you let your confidence go down. So keep your confidence level up. And that's why I enjoyed mentoring so many other women across my career, because I felt like I was able to share those experiences that I had so they didn't have to stumble across them, in their careers. And so I got much joy out of that, and gave them advice from my experiences. And very early in their career, I try to catch them, because that way they don't limit themselves as they look at what career path that they want to take on, et cetera. So, and then the only other thing I didn't mention sponsorship, but I was talking about mentorship. Sponsorship is much more formal. I also was focused on that as well, making sure that those who we saw as high potential females, you actually advocate for them in career discussions. So again, don't make it a competition. Support those who are coming behind you. But on the sustainable pipeline, just briefly, the biggest point I would make there is, it doesn't happen by chance. Intentional actions have to be taken for attracting, recruiting, retaining, and promoting women. And the one thing that can often hold that back, again, was talked about quite often here, is bias, especially that unconscious bias. I truly believe that most people don't intend to discriminate. They don't realize they're discriminating. So I think that those who are in hiring positions and interviewing for promotions should go through unconscious bias training and be very prepared. Also, teams that are doing the interviews and recruiting, make sure that they're diverse in nature. And I'm a big proponent of unconscious bias training for the entire organization, frankly, just to create and promote that more diverse culture.
Thank you so much. And I'm afraid we've run out of time.
Oh my.
And, but yeah, this is a very interesting discussion, and we hope that you continue to engage with us on the survey. And also, I think one last kind of final, drawstring to put a bow is just the importance of allyship. And I think it's reflected in this room.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you to the men for showing up and coming to this session.
Yes.
So, because you are our biggest allies.
Oh, yes.
Thank you so much for coming to this session. And if you would like to engage with our panelists, they're free to, feel free to come up and ask questions, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.